Dr. Trentinella, thank you for joining us again to bring us a different kind of work of art than what we've seen so far, stained glass,
Yes.
which is an important part of telling the biblical stories, particularly in cathedrals. Tell us about how those developed in prominence in these places of worship.
Absolutely. So the briefest I could summarize will be hinging around two terms. One is Romanesque, which is Roman-like. Modern terms, they did not call themselves this. 11th going into the 12th centuries, so the year 1000 going into the later 1100s. Then another term, again, modern, going back and labeling Gothic. Low-key an insult, but that might be a discussion for another time, is a distinction that art historians make between, in Central and Northern Europe, architecture that once again is being built in the Roman way. Monumental masonry construction, but in a manner that demanded thick walls and support for stone ceilings. Not a lot of room to put glass in a window if you're a bit concerned about the superstructure staying solid. So windows were relatively small, stained glass was relatively limited in use. Toward the end of the 12th century, we start seeing these experiments in architecture. They're experimenting with different types of arches, pointed rather than round, experimenting with intersecting vaults, groin vaults. They're in different places, especially in France, but others as well, trying out new engineering techniques for constructing churches in particular. And it all comes together at the end of the 12th century where they put all these innovations in combination, and that combination allows the wall to disappear because the wall is no longer needed to hold up the stone ceiling. And what that opens up is an entire new industry for creative production, which is glass, because glass will not hold up a stone roof, but it can tell stories. So the wall effectively disappears. The superstructure is being supported by these narrow columns and piers through innovations in physics and engineering and construction. And that allows a whole new industry to develop where glassmakers are using ancient techniques. Romans and Greeks, they made glass. They made glass in all different colors. But now they can create larger sized, intricately designed panels to fill in the gaps of the walls and effectively tell visual stories to an audience that at the time was not as likely to be literate, to be able to read the stories for themselves. And so there's an extra payoff there where the people in these spaces can look up and read visually the narratives or the content that's being shown while perhaps simultaneously hearing those lectures or sermons at the same time.
So in addition to these windows being larger and enabling the storytelling to be grander, all of a sudden it also means more natural light can get into a room, into a big cathedral.
Absolutely.
And so light now plays a role in telling these stories through stained glass as well.
Yes, in telling the history of this shift from Romanesque to Gothic, the most common touch point is a historical moment in Paris at the site of Saint-Denis, where the abbot, we know his name is Suger, because he wrote, and we have preserved a record of his administration. He wrote his memoirs, all the things that I accomplished while I was abbot of this church complex. And he writes very specifically about the reconstruction on ever grander scale, starting in the choir of this church, and describes the new innovation of the arches or the technology for construction specifically so that light can enter the space. The number of times you could count the word bright, the word light, the word illumination in this text is remarkable. It was very purposeful and intentional in how he describes his own patronage, his own facilitation of this renovation, that the renewed space is bright from top to bottom, from east end to west end, that to such a degree it was given its own term, lux nova, new light, as if the space had never seen such illumination before, because the walls had become glass.
It's something we take for granted in modern sanctuaries where we have electricity and it's bright in there because
Right.
we make it bright. This had to be a marvelous innovation.
Miraculous.
To have natural light in a worship space.
Yeah, effectively miraculous, especially if you consider that this innovation was pushed or spurred by patronage of the church as an institution, or Suger as an individual, as an agent of the church, to rebuild a cathedral, to rebuild a sacred space. They had the resources, they had the funds, they had the motivation to propel this effort to invent something in a way that had not previously been put together. And then it remains to this day. You can still visit Saint-Denis and see the windows as they had been installed.
Well, in addition to these stained glass windows being experienced communally, they were in a way created communally.
Absolutely.
Unlike sculptures and paintings that were given by a single benefactor, you are sharing that these stained glass windows were created by a community coming together.
Absolutely. Not unique at the time, but in particular, the windows at Bourges, we can see iconographically in the windows themselves, as well as through documentary evidence, that the various guilds in the city, so think of them like ancient medieval unions, the Association of Woolworkers or the Association of Carpenters, as groups came together to donate and allow these windows to be manufactured, either monetarily or through however the facilitation happened. And so some of the windows will show not just biblical narratives, but small scenes of everyday life, agriculture, woodworking, metallurgy. Those scenes are included in the windows very likely as homage or gratitude to the collective effort that had to go into their creation to begin with.
Well, this is a great example. This Prodigal Son window is massive, it's tall, and it depicts lots of scenes and industries that are not in the gospel story themselves,
Exactly.
but probably represent many of the different merchants and guilds that contributed to the window,
Absolutely.
like cattle and,
Yes.
and all sorts of other kinds of industries. Well, share some insights into the window itself. First of all, it starts at the bottom.
It does.
And works its way to the top. What's interesting to you about this window?
So, two things. One, the site itself, the plan of this particular cathedral is remarkable for having a double aisle and double ambulatory. What that means is on either side of the nave, there was not one but two aisles, maybe perhaps not that unusual. However, if you follow one aisle, let's say from the right-hand side facing the altar, you could walk all the way up around the apse and back again without interruption. And that was also true for that second aisle. So there was this parallel double track that went all the way around. What this means, practically speaking, is for a visitor in the church, let's say Mass is happening or some event is happening in the center space, you could continue up the aisle, around the ambulatory, and out again without disrupting anything going on in the middle space. And it also allows you to be physically quite close to those windows in a way that's in some other church plans would not allow, that perhaps the aisles would end before you were able to enter the choir space. So you could get physically close to the windows. Another feature is that the windows are actually on ground level. They go all the way down. They don't stop, usually about, let's say, head height. What this means is you could walk up to, but also see quite directly in front of you the lower portions of these windows. If you just see a photo on the internet and you just look at it, you might be tempted to read it top down. You would end up reading the story in reverse. The lower medallion in this window in particular tells the beginning of the story. Perhaps right at eye level, that first narrative panel, don't be confused if you ever look at the labels or the information about the window. Panel 4 is the beginning of the story. It shows the request for the inheritance. And then trying to figure out where do I go next, because they're not labeled, there's no text to guide you, you'd go clockwise, up and around the medallion, sort of. That's what you would want to do. If you go from the asking and you go up to the left, you find the giving of the inheritance. But then if you keep going clockwise, you've skipped half the story. You have to go across the middle. The center of the medallion shows 2 cattle farming. That has nothing to do with the story. It's one of those
cattle farmers who contributed to the window.
One might guess that would be a really great research question to pursue. You have to skip over that middle piece and go to the right side, so 3 o'clock on a clock face, and you would find the departure. This is the son on his horse leaving town. To finish this piece of the narrative, the rest of the departure is actually at the top position. So if you look in that medallion, there are 4 narrative panels with that 5th interjection, but you have to read it in a way that to us may not be intuitive. And one of the things to keep in mind is we might not know that it was intuitive to them to read it that way. And this can be a bit tricky when we're analyzing art from so far removed, especially if we follow the line of reasoning that the audience was majority illiterate. They're not reading from left to right. Maybe that's not their practice. It's harder for us to guess, okay, they'll look down on the way up. It's logical. You walk up, you see something, and then you start to read it up. That feels somewhat intuitive to understand. But once they lock on one scene, how to predict which way they go first is almost anybody's guess. It's sort of choose your own adventure, and any idea you have, you could pursue to some possible interpretation.
That's a fascinating way to study this window, and a reminder that a single story has lots of entry points for us as a hearer, as people who experience this story in real time.
Absolutely.
Dr. Trentinella, thank you for bringing this wonderful stained glass window to us.
You're welcome.